as biological diversity, or as it's known, biodiversity, is said to be a variety of plants, animals, and microorganisms, as well as there are genetic differences within and among species. It also considers the ecosystem in which these varieties of living things breed, as well as multiple kinds of interaction among members. Now, biological resources are pillars upon which we build our civilization. For example, it is estimated that around the world, fish provides 20% of animal protein to about 3 billion persons, you could imagine. And over 80% of human diets are provided by plants. As many as 80% of living people in rural areas in developing countries rely on traditional based medicines for basic healthcare. Unfortunately, and very sadly indeed, loss of biodiversity is threatening all this, especially the loss of biodiversity has led to the expansion of zoonotic diseases, that is, diseases that have been transmitted from animals to plants. Of course, we all know and we are still aware of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which was believed to have been transmitted from animals to plants. Now, however, if we keep our biodiversity intact, it offers an excellent tool to fight against pandemics like the COVID-19. I give one of my research as an example where we have seen that an increase in genetic diversity of tomatoes in Nigeria will surely prevent the emergence of diseases, bearing in mind the total near collapse or eradication of tomato between 2016 and 2018 as a result of the outbreak of the tomato Ebola, which was popularly called tomato Ebola, caused by Tuta absoluta, the tomato borer, which devastated tomato crops in the field, suggesting that there was a very low genetic diversity of tomato and the need to increase genetic viability. While we recognize the growing concerns regarding biodiversity as an asset, we remember that the IPPS assessment report of 2032 have reported 1 billion species which are going extinct. Thereby, there's a need to increase public awareness on this issue, not just during the day dedicated by the UN to celebrate the International Day for Biodiversity, but in our everyday life. Every Biodiversity Day carries a special significance. However, this year's global celebration brings with it a renewed sense of hope, with the adaptation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework at the 15th Conference of Parties, COP15, that held in December last year in Montreal. Now, to mark this historic achievement, the proposal for this year's theme is From Agreements to Action, Build Back Biodiversity, which builds on the results of COP15, as now that the world has a Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the focus now must be the swift implementation or action. So today's meeting is apt as we will be discussing the role of stakeholders to ensure that this agreement is put into action, especially in Nigeria. I want to welcome our guest speakers. In time, we will get to know them. And everyone who has joined us today, it promises to be an exciting conversation. My name is Andrew, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Thank you very much. And moving ahead, we would like to have an opening remark by the founder and global lead of WEP, that's the Women Environmental Program, in the person of my dear mama, friend, Dr. Priscilla Ochafa. Ma'am, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. You have really set the pace. You have really said a lot that I don't need to say anything again. You know, when experts begin to speak, some of us that are just learning You just sit down and listen. So thank you very much for giving that background and linking it up to what happened in COVID-19 and how we are not taking the issues of biodiversity seriously. It is indeed an issue that we as civil society and indeed Nigerians should take very seriously. Because whether we like it or not, there are so many things that are happening in terms of biodiversity. And if we don't take time, most of our animals will still go extinct. And once they go extinct, we have a challenge. And you know, that is why we have ecosystem. We need to coexist with our nature. There is no way we cannot coexist with our nature. I think this is coming at no better time than today that the whole world is celebrating the Biodiversity Day. And all I can say is that to welcome all of you and let's discuss and at the end of the day, come out with programs and plans of how we can address the issues of biodiversity in our continent, in our country, Nigeria. So thank you very much again, my dear brother. And I hand over the mantle of leadership to you. Go ahead and tell us what you know how best to do.
Thank you, Mama, for that welcoming address and welcoming remarks and setting up the pace for this beautiful discussion. I can assure our participants that today is going to be an exciting day. For housekeeping, before we go into the nitty-gritty, I would like all of us participants to put your name and your organization on the chat box for for our record purposes. Thank you very much. I will now call on Dimaris Uja to give us a little brief about our invited speakers. Dimaris, please. Damaris, please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ilo, for setting the pace, and thank you everyone for joining. So we have very vast speakers in the house that are conversant with issues of biodiversity, and it would be great to pay attention to them and listen to what they have to share with us. We have Mr. Abiodun Aderibigbe. He is the co-founder and director of research and business development at Sapphire and the managing director of WEMAX Consult. I will not be talking much about the profile because it will be displayed for you to see because we have limited time. But I assure you that Mr. Biodun has a lot of knowledge about biodiversity, and he was also at COP15 in Canada. So he will be sharing with us some of the outcomes of COP and how we all can play roles to conserve and protect biodiversity. And the next person that he didn't display it. Yes, the next person that will be joining Mr. Abiodun to share with us is Dr. Jamilat. Dr. Jamilat is also a biodiversity user and has good knowledge about biodiversity. She is the HOD of medical plant research at the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development. And she has vast knowledge in the area of plant taxonomy. And you know, those terms sometimes can be very, very confusing, but as experts, they can share more light on how we can conserve and use biodiversity in Nigeria and also globally. We can be sharing our knowledge of what best practices. Sorry about that. So they will also be sharing knowledge of best practices in the world people are using to conserve biodiversity. So, like I said earlier, we have a lot of interesting speakers, and it's time for us to relax and listen to them to see what they have to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimaris, for that beautiful introduction of our guest speakers. Participants, you'll see that indeed we have two big elephants in the room in terms of biodiversity expertise. And we will be listening to them. And I'm sure, like I said before, today is going to be an exciting day. So I'll kickstart the question section. I will start with Abiodun. Biodun, give us an overview in 1 minute or two, what happened during the last conference of parties, COP15 of the biodiversity that was held in Montreal, Canada.
Hello.
Abiodun, we can hear you. Go on.
Okay. Please. Okay. Thank you very much. I may not be able to share open my camera, but I'll try because of the poor network connectivity that I.
It's okay. It's okay without the camera, as long as we're hearing your voice. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I want to appreciate the Women Environment Program for this opportunity, and also would like to appreciate the Executive Director, Dr. Priscilla Achapa. And I also want to thank Damaris for finding sustainable environment as one of the organizations to be involved. And I want to thank the Nigerian Pollinators Group for this opportunity, because that's where most of us are really connected. So my name is Adelibigbe Abiodun, like I was introduced, and I'm the Director for Research and Sustainable Environment, Food and Agriculture Initiative. Yes, I won't like to bother you about details of our organization. You can go to our website. You get more details about it. But concerning why we are here, the Cummins Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was passed in December, and it has become a global convention that will govern biodiversity for the next decade. So the framework, I wouldn't want to bother us with some of the jargons, but I'll just talk about the key decisions that we are taking so that we won't take much of time, owing to the fact that this program is more of efficiency rather than for us just to spend a lot of time. So it was a COP to make or break. It was a very important COP because the issue of the three planetary crises that we have, environmental crisis, pollution, climate change, and biodiversity is on the front burner, and the issue of the biodiversity, which is governed by the Convention on Biological Diversity, which Nigeria is a signatory to, is paramount and very apt. So the meeting was convened in December, and it was a COP of make and break, like I said. So the Cummins Montreal targets, 21 of them was adopted eventually, and it has the adopted target has a monitoring framework. It's different from other. It has a monitoring framework. It includes resource mobilization, the issue of capacity building, which is very important for Africa. Gender was mainstreamed there. The issue of indigenous people, which is key, was also, at the end of the day, about 69 decisions were adopted, 4 long-term goals that will enable us to reach the 2050 goal of living in harmony with nature. So the framework, like I said, has 22 and 23 targets, which is to be achieved by 2030. So what we are saying is that the convention has started running already, so we don't have time. So the issue of implementation, this is 2023, 7 years to implement, so that it won't end like the other conventions that were other conventions and other framework that we couldn't go much on it. So we can say that target one. Let me just summarize the whole target for us.
Summarize in 1 minute, please. Thank you, Fabiola.
Okay. We have target 1 to hit, that has to do with reducing threats on biodiversity. Target 9 to 13, meeting people's need to through sustainable use of genetic resources, while target 14 to 23 talks about the tools and solution as well as how do we measurement of biodiversity. So eventually components for implementation and accountability, we are a framework, we are also in the target, as well as the responsibility and transparency, the issue of educational awareness, among others, for the sake of time. So I think.
Perfect, Abiodun. I thank you so much. You've given us an overview of what transpired in Montreal. It's quite difficult to give an overview in 3 minutes for something that has taken years, and also even in Montreal, it was like 2 weeks or 3 weeks negotiation. So I thank you so much for giving us that overview. So I go to Dr. Jamila, Dr. Ibrahim. You've heard that the targets, and what is on my mind now is how do we achieve these targets within the 7 years frame timeline, 2030? Now, if we must achieve this, we need to identify key stakeholders. So tell us, who do you think are the key stakeholders of biodiversity conservation and restoration, and how can we engage them effectively, bearing in mind that we have 7 years to achieve these adopted targets? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ilo. Good morning, participants. Let me quickly also introduce myself. Damaris was really tried, but I know the biography was also displayed, but let me also add this. I am Dr. Jamila Ali Ibrahim, and Damaris was trying to pronounce the institute, National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development. That's where I work. I'm the head of the Department of Medicinal Plant Research and Traditional Medicine. I'm a plant taxonomist and a biosystematics, and I'm also someone who uses a lot of biodiversity and has a relationship with stakeholders and organizations that has to do with biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. So let me also use the opportunity to thank women in Women Environmental Program. Is a good opportunity for me to also be able to say my part on the issue of biodiversity conservation, especially those of us who use it and go out to the field and we know what is happening there. So I thank them for this opportunity, and I'm grateful to have the floor to say 1 or 2 things about biodiversity conservation and what is currently happening. Yes, back to Dr. Ilo's question. The COP15 had a lot of targets and a lot of conclusion and a lot of goals to be achieved. And then while we're looking at those goals, reducing threats, sustainable use, measurement of biodiversity, management of diversity laws and others, we'll be asking ourselves, who are the stakeholders? Who are those that is going to put all these programs together? Who are those that will achieve this? The question I'll ask, for me, if you ask me, the first thing I'll tell you, I will say is everyone. Me, you, everybody. Whether you're a government institution, whether you're a civil society, whether you're into research, local communities, women, children, the farmers, each and everyone, so long as you live on earth and you breathe, you are a stakeholders in achieving all these programs that has been set in order to reduce biodiversity loss. The civil society have a role to play. They're already trying theirs. The government agency has theirs. They are also highly involved and doing theirs. But there are some group of stakeholders that most of the time we tend to ignore. Or most of the time we do not really carry along, because when you talk of this biodiversity conservation and all the big programs and the initiative put together, if those key stakeholders are not involved, then the achievement of those goals will be very minimal. So I would like to say that those key stakeholders are the communities, the indigenous people, the local women, the women in the communities who are close to this biodiversity, the farmers who have direct access to what we have in their communities, the children who also have a way of having a part to play in biodiversity conservation. So yes, looking at all the stakeholders, I would say everyone, me, you, everyone. In fact, I would have said we should include the animals too, if they have the means to know the danger of what it is to have biodiversity loss. If they have the intellectual capacity that God has given to us, the humans, if they also have, they will know the danger involved in biodiversity loss, because the effect is also affecting the animal. The birds are no longer where they are. You can't find them anywhere. The animals too, the insects too, are not as readily available as they are. Their own loss is also being affected as a result of activities mainly caused by humans. So I think with that, Dr. Ilo, if I'm able to answer that question, then can I move to the next one?
Okay, no, just how do we engage them effectively? 1 minute,
okay.
Please. Thank you.
Okay, yes, engaging them effectively. As I said, I've mentioned most of those stakeholders that I talked about. The governments are mainly there for policies, the policy formulations, which we have so many of them. Currently, Nigeria has so many policies that are environmental friendly on paper. So the government has to start working on implementation, enforcement of those policies. The civil societies too have a lot of programs. Currently, the women environmental program, the women in environmental program are also doing a lot. They have other programs. There are several initiatives of going on this. There should be a synergy. One of the things we lack in this conservation issue is that there are no synergy. The Research Institute have data. It should be shared. Dr. Ilo is sharing the data this morning, which I was really surprised. I'm not aware of that data. Yes, we should have synergy. The Research Institute have data that are lying down there that the other people who need to use those data do not have. So that is another area. The local communities are there. You are making the government is making laws and policies that is going to be implemented in a local community. The people in that local community are not even aware of those. So there should be a synergy between all these stakeholders where all of us come together, those of us who are key stakeholders, and we should begin to work together. It's a problem generally when it comes to program implementation, where everybody try to work in silos. My own take is that there should now be a synergy where all these stakeholders, the local communities, the civil organization, the NGOs, the government agencies, and not just what, there are several government agencies, the Ministry of Environment, the Agric, everybody working in silos. There should be a synergy where all this is being put together for us to be able to achieve this. Because if you want to talk of sustainable use, and you're talking of someone in my community being protected with a certain an endemic plant that is threatened, and I'm not aware as a local person in that community of that plant being threatened, and a policy being made at the federal level to protect that, and I'm not aware of that, then how do you intend to implement that? Then the Ministry of Environment is busy with what do you call it? Environmental impact assessment program, which companies are all submitting. The environmental audits are not properly also monitored. That should be done so that for me in my community is aware of what is there, and then for me to also be able to work towards implementing this. Basically, there should be a buy-in by all the stakeholders, and that can be facilitated by the civil societies, by the government agency, by the NGOs, and by all of us.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Two things caught my attention in what you're saying. The data usage, a lot of research into a lot of data is out there. We need to start using those data, and the need for synergy among stakeholders. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for that. I come to you, Abiodun. We now know who are the stakeholders, who are the, how to engage them effectively. How do we now mobilize public or private finances, to finance biodiversity conservation? Of course, it's not just about engaging stakeholders or gathering stakeholders. We need finance, and it appeared very, very vital during the negotiation at COP. So tell us, how can we mobilize these funds? Especially, let's look at it from the local point of view or the national point of view. How do we mobilize funds for biodiversity conservation? Thank you.
Let me quickly speak to the issue of stakeholders. I think Dr. Ilu has really spoken on it. But let's just, the issue of the private sector. I was at a forum of group of private sector. We were, in fact, major private sector group in Nigeria launching the environment sector, because everybody is now target 15 speaks about the role of businesses on the issue of biodiversity. So it was the environment was there, the minister was represented, and one of the agents in NESRA was there. This group of private sector, they came out. And
Abiodun, could you just put off your video, because we can't really get you. Just put off a video so that people have good net. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, I was talking about, and just before I go to the issue of finance, that the issue of stakeholders engagement, especially for the private sector, is very germane. There are a group of private sectors that are saying some of the progress that government has made in terms of models to finance environment and biodiversity, that they have set up their group already, that they are going to look at it. They are not even convinced about government's program. Not to talk of them being aware about the importance of biodiversity. Nigeria, we used to focus more on climate change, but research has shown that Nigeria is more of a biodiversity impacted nation more than even the issue of climate change. When you talk about industrialization, building expansion, all of these things, they impact more directly on our biodiversity and livelihood around them. So coming to the issue also, we need to engage the private sector, and we need to do this now that the convention has been passed. It has to be the joint responsibility of the Ministry of Environment, the National Orientation Agency, the CSOs. We have a lot of roles to play too, and all the other stakeholders. Just like Dr. Jamila has said. So on the issue of finance, unfortunately for Africa, Africa's position on the issue of financing biodiversity globally, we went with the view of getting one commitment from the developed country of 1% global GDP, of which Africa couldn't get. In fact, at the last 48 hours, Africa tried a lot, but when you go to some of these COP, there are ways this developed country influence decision. Eventually, Africa couldn't get that financial framework, which will have helped developing countries a lot on the issue of passing biodiversity laws. However, there are still they now have to expand GEF funding to capture for biodiversity. These are and there are a lot of other international funds that are coming in. We can leverage on the the European Green Deal? How do we do our own national, our own local biodiversity policy now in terms of localizing the GBF to align with some of these goals, international goals, like the goals of the European Green Deal, the goal of the GEF8 that will be launched recently. So we need to look at how we can align some of these to get some of these international funds, bilateral funds, all these multilateral funds like the European Union Fund, and also the development banks, the African Development Bank, they can help in this regard. But no matter how we tend to look for all of these grants, the best form of finance for biodiversity, I think, will be from the locally, one that is locally generated. So what are the things that government can do? Government will drive the process. In most countries, about the issue of biodiversity, the environment, they fall in economics under what we call public goods. And there are no incentives for such kind of goods. So, but what do we do? No incentives for people to really invest in such kind of goods. But what do? We leverage on our legislation. We leverage on the on tax system, environmental tax. In as much as the environment is not a direct good, but however, the environment is providing a lot of services that we cannot even evaluate. How do you quantify the value of clean air, for example? You can't quantify it, but when the air is not clean, that is when you know the impact. How do you value the carbon sequestrations that is going on in our wetlands, in our peatland, and all of that? But somebody has to pay for it. So this is the time whereby government has to have things like the issue of environmental tax, which some of these private sectors says they really want to fight. So they need to create that kind of legislation the type that we allow for environmental tax, that we allow for service use charges. There is this model that is called, I think, PES, payment for ecosystem service. We can have a forest instead of us allowing our forest to just degrade and to just leave it empty. We can create security around it, create tourism potential around it, and people pay for ecosystem services in this regard. The issue of private sector buying carbon credit, we cannot downplay on it. There has to be, thank God that Nigeria has done some things in terms of carbon credits, but can we step it more? The issue of green bonds and all this funding should not just be funding that are going into other developmental purposes. The way the money is being structured overseas, whereby we see all this biodiversity working, is that the money is plugged back into the environment. They use it to develop green projects, renewable energy related projects, biodiversity, remediation, all of these. So we have a whole lot of resources that we can leverage on, that government can leverage on. Private sector, they can set certain percentage of their profits, that will be remitted into the government for biodiversity remediation, because their activities impact more on biodiversity than even climate change. Or even the fund can be used for all the three planetary crises. So Nigeria, we are sitting on a great piece of opportunity. I think when we get that political will and government begin to look at that direction, we will depend less on foreign funds or grants or all this money that are very competitive.
Thank you so much, Abiodun, for those beautiful and insightful comments with regards to financing biodiversity. I took out from your speech tax legislature to have good legislation for tax incentives, ecotourism, green bonds. Of course, Nigeria is undergoing some form of green bonds, eco-friendly approaches. And one thing that came out tops, it's the need to have private sector involvement in terms of their corporate social responsibility on the environment. Dedicate some form of funds for the environment. Thank you again for that. Jamila, you have worked with local people. As a medicinal plant expert, you can only get this local knowledge to improve on your scientific knowledge. Now, how can we, with all the knowledge, indigenous knowledge, which I call it, or some people call it traditional knowledge, how can we inculcate these local communities with this vast amount of indigenous knowledge, into this decision-making process involving biodiversity conservation or biodiversity consolidations, bearing in mind their vast knowledge of biodiversity over decades and decades, decades and decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ilo, for that. There was something Dr. Aderibigbe said, and that has to do with funding. He mentioned most of the international funding sector. In fact, he really dealt with that, and I'm happy. And he has also talked about the local communities, the local way of generating funds for conservation of biodiversity, which I'm fully in support of. And if I want to link that to the local communities, which are the group of people I work with a lot, as a plant taxonomist and someone who is into indigenous knowledge, liaising with indigenous people in terms of their indigenous knowledge, there are a lot of things we have seen going out there to the field. And that's why I'm happy that Mr. Aderibigbe is talking about the environmental tax, the industries. There should be some form of tax from them. You see, there was also something he said, which I want to emphasize, that yeah, the climate change is there, but the most important thing that is touching us in developing world, Nigeria specifically, is our biodiversity loss. When you go out there, what you see in the last, in fact, just take a span of 5 years and you go out to the same location, now you'll be surprised what you see. Go to our local communities. There was a study we did in 2012 where we tried to discuss with local communities, especially those who use by the traditional medicine practitioners and then the farmers, to seek to even get their awareness on what is happening to our environment, especially our plant biodiversity. And you'll be surprised the kind of information. They were like, no, plants is a gift from God. They will always be there. That is their own thought. That is their belief. But a follow-up question was surprising. We said, yes, please give me a list of plants that you find it very difficult to collect around you. And we were surprised the number of species they were mentioned. This one will say, this plant is no longer found here. I have to travel to Sokoto to get it. This one, I have to send somebody to Katsina to buy. This study was done around Nasarawa State, FCT Nasarawa. And by the time we compile the number of species, they now find it very difficult to buy, to get from their surroundings, which according to them, they just pick from the back of their homes or from their farms. But now they have to send people out of FCT or out of Nasarawa State to get those plants, or they have to buy from the medicine seller. You will be surprised for those number of species. So you try to link the two, which means what it means is that this local community, those indigenous people are not aware of biodiversity loss. Meanwhile, they are the main user of this plant biodiversity. Take note, the traditional medicine practitioners do not only use plants, they use also animals as part of their recipes for their herbal products. So while we're looking at this, the local communities need to be involved. We need to find a way of creating awareness. They need to be aware first that there is a problem with our biodiversity. We need to let the industries where I work in an area where about 10 or 15 years ago, what we do, we leave our office to go out for field work, and we come back later in the evening, and we have specimen and different species of specimen that the following day we take another route. But in about 2 or 3 years now, we cannot do that. Those environment is no longer there. We don't see those plants anymore. There are some plants we use for our work that we collect within our locality, but now we have to travel as far as Kaduna to Katsina to get those species. So the local communities need to be aware of this. That is the first thing we need to do. We need to let them be aware that there is a problem with our biodiversity. And their activities too, their activities is one of those that is posing problem to it. Their collection method, we need to train them on how to collect their specimen, especially if they are working with bark or root of a plant. We also need to train them for them to know that cultivation will not only ensure the sustainability of their raw material, it will also ensure quality control of their raw material. We need to also let them know. Then we need to also ask with those people to document their indigenous knowledge. That is one thing that is highly lacking. So those indigenous knowledge, those people are going, and those indigenous knowledge are going away. Yes, we have the modern herbalists now, we have the modern people, educated people are currently going into such business, but they call them the herbal producers. Those herbal producers too are also, most of the time, source their raw material from the wild. So we also need to engage all personally, I feel that this group of people are not efficiently being inculcated, are not being efficiently, liaised with in area of biodiversity conservation by all programs, by all stakeholders. I call them the neglected stakeholders. I think we should start looking at those group of people, the traditional medicine practitioners, the herbal medicine producers. They are not necessarily the local people. They are not necessarily the indigenous people. Educated people are already into it. They are big business now. But herbal medicine is a multi-million-dollar business all over the world. So people are going to it. Exports are happening. So we need to involve those people when it comes to biodiversity conservation. And we also need to involve industries, especially those in their local communities, to begin to put something down in the area of biodiversity. We also need to start ensuring that some enforcement are being enforced. There are policies that are there guiding all this. We need to ensure that some of those policies are being enforced by the relevant authorities to be able to guide some of those indigenous people. As far as I'm concerned, they are currently not being involved enough in biodiversity conservation. So all the relevant, the civil society, yes, that's why I'm happy with this, the women in the environmental program, their initiative. That's why I'm happy, because they will be looking more at the women farmers. There are several of them. We are the ones that go to the farm. We're the ones that have a lot to do with our biodiversity, especially in our local communities. So yes, there are several we can do. And for those of us who are the biodiversity user, if you ask me, how do we expect that there is change? How do we measure it? What I would expect to see might be different from what Dr. Ilo or Dr. Aderibe would be expected to see. Dr. Aderibe has documents. Dr. Ilo has documents that has to do with what is currently happening. But me as a layperson in the society who use biodiversity, I want to see my environment changing. I want to see more plants. I want to see that the area that has been designated for green area, it remains as green area. It's not being taken up by something else. So with that, all that, I think there are several things we can still do, and we need to begin to involve the indigenous people in our conservation initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Indeed, women are the custodians of biodiversity. I always say that women provide all the dietary requirements of the family. So, and there's a very big link between biodiversity and the food system, and women in the center of both aspects. So I also would also give it to the Women Environment Program for the good job they are doing with women in the environment. This is a follow-up question to Abiodun. Abiodun, how can NGOs like WEP, like yours, like mine, how can we help to measure the level of achievement in biodiversity conservation in Nigeria? And how can we hold stakeholders accountable for biodiversity progress or biodiversity loss, depends on how we want to see it, what angle we want to see it, either a cup half full or a cup half empty. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ilu, for that, for those questions. And I want to, okay, Dr. Jamila, you have promoted me to the rank of doctor. I accept that promotion.
Very soon.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the role of NGOs, civil society is very germane. If we will conserve the remaining biodiversity that we have in Nigeria, which is depleting fast. So, and on the issue of holding governments accountable, NGO has diverse roles. On the issue of engagement, we need to engage governments. If you don't engage them, you can't hold them accountable. And one thing we must do is that we must engage them in a collaborative manner. If they look at us as civil society, that we are being confrontational, you may not really get that open mind or that reception from government. So we must work in a collaborative manner, which I believe WEP has been doing. There are a lot of other NGOs in the environment space that needs to engage government in our different local governments, in our different state ministry of environment, even at the level of federal. Though everybody cannot be at federal, but even in that your own locality, for us at CEFI, when the issue of biodiversity, we observe. I stay in Ikorodu, where is one of the highly rich biodiverse region of Lagos State. And we discovered that a lot is going on. We had to engage government. When we first of all got there, they don't really give us that space. You know, government, they usually see you as people of NGO. You want to come and look into what they are doing, but we did it in a collaborative manner. We had to explain. Just like what Dr. Jamila was saying, that they asked some farmers, this traditional medicine, some questions related to the issue of some of their materials that they are sourcing, that somebody says is a gift from God. But when the follow-up question came, you see how they were able to really appreciate biodiversity. So we had to engage them, let them know the importance. So another thing that society can do is the issue of education. That was when we came up with the Ikorodu Environment Summit. We brought every one of them on board, because some of them, when you say you are NGO, they believe you have gotten one big grant from somewhere. Some will think that maybe they must get their own share, and because the way some NGOs have been behaving in time past, so they think maybe you've gotten that. But when they see your intentions, that you have pure intentions, you want to really add value. That is why, as environmental NGO, we must have that capacity. They are looking for capacity. They are looking for people that have that skill that they don't even have. Some of them, you need to support them. We supported on our own. We went on and we did the Lagos State Marine Litter Action Plan. We took it to the Lagos State Ministry of Environment. So when we got there, they discovered that this environment NGO, they are coming with value. And together we are able to send that document to UNEP, and that became the foundation on which some of the environmental laws and some of the environmental progress that Lagos has made was built on. So we must come up with awareness raising campaign. We must. On the issue of biodiversity, level of knowledge is still low, and we have to do this in local languages. We need to come up with campaigns. We need to come up with songs. For us in CEFI, we have a song that is online now. We had over 50,000 views now from different parts of the world, Keepers of the Earth. It was, in fact, the song was produced during COVID, and it became an engagement tool for us. So that even when you are speaking with government on the issue of awareness, you can tell them, look at our song. They want to look at what you have done. So when somebody views and they saw 50,000 views, wow, we can work together. How do we create awareness in Southwest? How do we create awareness in Lagos? So NGOs, we must collaborate with government in developing some of this content, developing some of these put our knowledge and our trust. Our trust that we have on the at the grassroots and bring it on board, and we can work collaboratively with government. I'm telling you, the reception level is high. People are looking forward to conserving the environment, working with farmers in Oyo State. We discovered when we went to the farmers and we were talking to them on biodiversity. Some of them, they were very apprehensive initially, but when they saw the benefits, they saw how they can how it can be of value to them. They open up and collaboratively with government. We bring everyone on board. That was when we had the just transition in farming practice in Oyo State. So we had to engage. We have to engage. There is no and it must be collaborative. It must not be confrontational. So government needs us, and our capacity as civil society is needed. On the issue of research, we can do research too, like the organization of Dr. Ilo that has a lot of capacity in the issue of research. They are looking for people like that have this knowledge that they don't need to go get a consultant. On the issue of funding, we can collaborate with them. NGOs, you attend some of these meetings, you have access to funding, collaborate with government, and government can access some of this funding. And when they see that you are bringing value, they will classify your own NGO or your organization as a value-added organization, and you'll be able to make more influence. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abiodun. I'm also promoting you to doctor because you have this vast amount of knowledge. Thank you so much for that. We are getting to the home stretch now, and I would want to ask you, both of you, in 1 minute each. We'll start with Dr. Ibrahim. How do we address the challenges? We know there are quite a lot of challenges. How can we address these challenges? In 1 minute, thank you. Then after that, Abiodun, you give us your own response.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ilo. Quickly, let me, the challenges. In the first instance, let me say this. One of the main challenges we have, which as far as I'm concerned is still a challenge, is that we still do not know what we have. You cannot conserve what you do not know. So there's still a lot of knowledge lacking in our biodiversity and its value. So first we need to look at knowing what we have. Let me give an example. We do not have a flora for Nigeria. The current document we use is which is a flora of West Tropical Africa, was published in 1954. And that is the current document we're still using.
We all use that document. We all use that document.
Thank you. We're still using it up till now. This is 2023. So how do you conserve what you do not know? So we need to know what we have for us to. We can start somewhere. Let's start by putting together some of these documents. Let's have a flora of Nigeria. The Nigeria Society of the Botanical Society of Nigeria has tried to initiate that several times. But of course, we all know that when it comes to field work, a lot of fund is involved. So that is the first one. The country needs to know what you have. Yes, I just give an example of plants. How about the insects? How about the other area? Dr. Ila, I know your field too. So we need to have a documentation. We are currently working on DNA barcoding. We need to have a database of what we have for easy identification. In that way, we also need to solve what we call the taxonomic impediments, where there are no people expertise to tell us, identify what you have for us. So we need to address that. Yes, another area, research. There are so many information available in all places, several research institutions. We need to start harnessing that information together. We need to do more research in area. When you talk of conservation, there are some information you need to have. The best way to conserve a species or to work in an environment, you need to do a research. That is also, we need to work on that. Funding is one main reason. Yes, Dr. Albiri, so I'll still continue to call you doctor. Very soon, I know you'll be one. Mention several of those international funds. They are available. But the truth is that as they are available, the people who actually need those funds to carry out environmental studies or research or environmental program do not know how to access those funds. So we need to put a program in place on how to access some of those international funding. I can assure you that there are so many people who have good proposals, good agenda on what to do, but they do not know how to access those funding. So the country also should start thinking of putting a funding method in place. There are several suggestions made by Mr. Aderibigbe, very good suggestion. Biodiversity tax, environmental tax, industry should also start putting something together in that area. Then we also need to involve several other stakeholders that we're ignoring. The herbal medicine producers, the TMPs, the women, the local community, we need to do that. So I think Mr. Aderibigbe will handle the other ones.
Thank you so much. One thing that came out tops what you've said is let us know what we have. I mean, we cannot start anything planned. We cannot start anything if we do not know what we have. So let's start from there. Let's know what we have. Abiodun, what else do you think it's a challenge, and how do we address that? In 1 minute, please. Thank you.
Dr. Jamila has really dealt with the issue of challenges and solution. And I'll just, and there, somebody said there is no wrong in repeating, in repetition, as long as you are repeating great minds. So I'll just say what she has said in another way. I think the issue of prioritization of biodiversity, we need to put the issue of biodiversity on the priority list of government. We know that climate change is getting the attention now, but this is the golden egg that we can leverage on. Biodiversity now, nature, everybody is talking about nature. Can Nigeria prioritize biodiversity? Look at the issue. They said I think it was last year, the theme of World Environment Day was time for nature or something like that. So it's time for nature. Everybody is talking about biodiversity. We need to reverse the laws. There's a lot of carbon that can be synced when biodiversity is in place, and there's a lot of international funding that is available. So when we prioritize it, and thank God we have developed some documents, a lot of strategy. Nigeria has a lot of strategy. Can we harmonize all of this strategy and look at the advantage and do a proper proposal? If you look at the funding or the fundings that countries are getting in Africa, you can't beat the East Africa. Kenya, they are getting grants in millions of dollars, billions of dollars. Ethiopia, all of those countries. Can Nigeria really harness what we have? At times they will tell you, you have not reviewed your MBSAP, you have not done this, you don't have this strategy. We have some of those strategies now. When we prioritize the environment and biodiversity, what can we get? Then the issue of finally, please, we need to empower our indigenous people. I got a news from somebody yesterday about 4,500 acres of land. A company bought it, a Chinese company. They are still grabbing land. That is biodiversity loss. They disguise it, that they want to use it for agriculture or this thing. There are no conservation elements or biodiversity elements in that. So let's empower our own indigenous people. Let them know about their land rights. Let them know that biodiversity is futuristic. It may not seem important to them now. Even now it's important. But what about the future, the unborn generation? They are bequeathing their land, bequeathing biodiversity, that all these Chinese, all these orcs will just come and grab them. So we must empower them in terms of knowledge, in terms of the importance and the value of biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abiodun. We must empower our local people to know about their rights. I really appreciate both of you. Dr. Jamila, thank you. Abiodun, thank you so much for those wonderful insights. Both of you are indeed experts in your various fields. To our participants, I am very sure we're having a great time and we are learning a lot of things. I have learned a lot. I have, had a lot of things there. I'm having to ask a few questions. So if you have questions, you could signify by raising up your hands. And I've seen quite a lot of comments from some of our participants in the chat room. Some of us, for example, agreeing to what our invited guests are saying. And even we have a participant from Uganda telling us that she's happy to be here and that she's enjoying what we are currently discussing. So if you have questions or comments and you'd really like to share, either you put it on the chat box or you signify by raising up your hand, then I will get to you. Thank you. We have, let's say, 5 minutes to do that, then we can wrap up. Yes, oh, yes, perfect. I would also like to welcome the UN, my friend and brother, Mr. Muyiwa Odele, for his question. He has his hand up. Thank you. Mr. Mu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ilo. This, I think, I find extremely interesting. And I want to congratulate the two speakers also. Their passion for the subject and the level of expertise that they are demonstrating now is really inspirational. But I have a few questions. I know that Dr. Aderigbe was talking about financing, and they are talking about environmental tax. So the question is, do they think tax will work for the environment sector, given that there's general apathy, you know, on the part of every Nigerian for taxes? And if you look at the amount of revenue that government has generated from tax to date, it's really nothing to write home about. So by the time you introduce environmental taxation, do you think it will be effective? He also said something about mobilizing financial resources domestically. We have what we call ecological fund. How effective has this fund been? You know, so there are so many opportunities. Even the green bond he spoke about can also be restructured to target conservation of biodiversity, but it's not happening. So if you have this quality of experts in Nigeria with this level of knowledge, you know, exposure, why is it not happening? So it would just be good to hear a few things about that. About the flora of Nigeria, in fact, I'm shocked to hear this, that we do not have a current one. So I'm wondering, what are the research institutions that are receiving grants from government doing on an annual basis that we don't have an updated flora of Nigeria report? And then two last questions. I know it will be a bit provocative. One is, do we really have indigenous people in Nigeria? I hear that people who talk about indigenous people. Do we have, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just curious if they can share the definition of indigenous people in Nigeria, because it has become a bit controversial for us. The other day we were developing a project proposal and the question came up. So I just wanted to learn from them. Then finally, they said that Nigeria is more biodiversity impacted than climate change impacted. Is that like a generalization based on their own knowledge, or is something that is captured in any report, you know, which they can share bilaterally? Because I know that climate change is one of the major drivers of biodiversity loss. By the time you have increase in, you know, average mean temperature, of course, it will lead to all kinds of disruptions and destruction of ecosystems and so on. So I found that very interesting. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you
and congratulations so to WEP, to you, and to the speakers.
Thank you, Muyiwa, for that. Those, like you said, provocating questions. I would also, it's good to hear from you. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Dr. Jemilat and Biodun, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, should I go first?
Absolutely, ma'am. You have the floor.
Mr. Muyiwa, thank you very much for your comments. The first one has to do with, I will respond. I think Mr. Aderigbe will respond to some of them, but let me respond the one that directly feel directly concerns me. You mentioned the indigenous people. There are some terms that are there, and yes, there are some times that maybe those of you who are into environmental programs that have all those documents will find it very difficult to understand. For me, I would refer to those people as the locals, those people in our villages, the local communities. If you notice, each time I mention the indigenous people, I always add the local communities. Yes, the indigenous people in its own terms, you want to say the people that are indigenous to that community. Well, relatively, you might say that is wrong. I know that's what you're trying to say, because there are some people in those local communities that are not indigenous to that community. So if you notice, each time I make my statement, I usually add the locals. I prefer using the word the locals, because yes, the indigenous people is a kind of a little bit not stable. But these are terms that are in documents that are found, that have been used over time. So it's very difficult for you to just, you know, when you want to talk to people in that field, they need to hear those names for you to be able to make impact. The local peoples, the locals in their community, those are the people in their community, the villages we go to. You don't call those people the city people. They are the local people. Yes, some people might be indigenous to that environment. That might be where they are and from beginning, and that's how they are. But there are some people that are not indigenous to that environment. So I use both of them. Most of the time I say indigenous, and most of the time I refer to them as the local people in their local communities. The second one you asked on the flora. Yes, it's a good question you're asking with all those grants going to the investees. You see, there was something I said earlier on. I said synergism, working together. Fund. I know you are aware that the investees are crying every day. They are underfunded. Field work is a highly expensive endeavor. Those of us in the field know. Dr. Ilo, you can testify to that. It's highly expensive. So, and for you to do flora of Nigeria is something that spanned for over a long period of time, and it involves a lot of funding. Yes, maybe if all the investors are working together and they pinch from bit they have, maybe it can work. I am not from the investors, so I might not be able to speak for them. But I know as a biodiversity user, as a plant taxonomist, that is an area that I have identified, not only me, we have identified as a problem. Yes, as I also said, the Botanical Society of Nigeria is working on that. They have initiated something some years back and they are working on it. But I know that it's not moving as fast as they would have wanted, because funding is also a major problem to that project. Yes, the investors, I might not be able to speak for them because I'm not from the investee setting, but I know they also have their challenges. And I'm very sure if any of them is here, they will be able to speak specifically why some of those projects that we think is easy to handle as investing might be difficult for them. There was something I also want to add. Mr. Aderibigbe was at that, but let me just add something in the area of the tax. Well, the tax I have in mind when Mr. Aderibigbe mentioned it was not tax for individuals. Me, I'm looking at it like tax for industries. You know, there is something that the pharmaceutical setting. They use a lot of, the industries use a lot of environmental biodiversity. Some of them use it. If some of those taxes can come from those industries, that's my own. Yes, as you said, it's very minimal, it's very small, it's highly insignificant. But I think it can, no matter how significant it is, it can serve. That's the area I'm looking at, not environmental taxes for everybody. Environment for industries, those who are involved in environmental base, those who have industries even site in those communities, they should be made to be responsible for their environment. That's the way I see it. Mr. Aderibigbe might have more on that area for him to be able to clarify what he meant by that. Yes, I hope I'll be able to answer one or two questions that has to do with me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. Mr. Biodun, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ilu, and thank you very much, Mr. Muiwa, for those questions. I'll try to answer them. I think on the issue of tax, some of those tags are already, some of them are even already in place. I think Lagos State has something that has to do with emission tax. But the tax need to be broadened. Environmental tax, we can't do without it. And as a matter of fact, the NESRA has introduced, I think they are introducing something like an emission tax, because I was at the manufacturers forum when they were launching their environment unit just last 2 weeks in Lagos, and the NESRA DG was there, and the DG of MAN too was there. So this became the issue of this environmental tax was raised. And even as diverse as those manufacturers were, and even as they differ, some of them differs on the issue of tax. This tax we are talking about will be leveraged on the, will be directed towards the manufacturers. But eventually, I'm quoting the director of the DG of NESRA now. He said this tax should be passed to the consumers. For example, if I'm taking sachet water, if I'm paying, if they just put an additional cost on that sachet water, they might not tell me it's an environmental tax, but for today, manufacturers who will have to repatriate that fraction to the government, I think is an environmental tax on him. So what they need to do now, and even in that forum, I think the tax system is supposed to start June 1st. And some of the manufacturers were even concerned. They said, so government should give them timeline, that what are the incentives? So it shows some of them are willing to embrace that. We want to comply with this environmental tax. We know, but give us incentive in some other areas. So if initially there might be some resistance, but government, we need to empower them. We need to tell them about the benefits, and once they are aware and they are able to give them some incentives to support them. So I think the issue of that tax, it can be resolved. On the issue of Nigeria more of biodiversity impacted than climate change. Climate change, is a global crisis. But when statistics shows that I think agriculture is responsible for about 70% of our employ 70% of Nigerians. And when we look at the issue of land clearing that is going on, a lot of activities that is going on in manufacturing, infrastructure. So a lot of biodiversity is being lost, no doubt. And even during COP, some of the narrative that the African countries are giving in favor of biodiversity is that Africa is more biodiversity impacted than that. And they quoted some materials, which I'll try to lay my hands on. Maybe I can share it with Mr. Muiwa later. But when we look at the kind of development that is going on in Lagos, Ikorodu, for example, Ikorodu, Epe, a lot of lands are being cleared for houses. So you cannot but come to that conclusion that biodiversity, we are making a case of biodiversity, though there might not be empirical studies to show for that. And I think it's an opportunity, is an outcome that we can look at based on this discussion to really evaluate if that assertion is really can really stand in terms of it's an area we can look in on the issue of indigenous. Finally, on the issue of indigenous people, I think the issue of indigenous people is we've discussed that with Dr. Ilo, I think during our last meeting, it came up. The issue of indigenous people is contextual, and it's highly controversial, even globally. Some people, even in Canada, some people came and they said they're indigenous people. They stopped them from entering. They had to make they said there's no indigenous people in Canada. They had to make a lot of noise and before the final, and even they gave them a 24 hours pass during, and I was able to meet some of those people. So we have people that are indigenous, and to be on the safer side, just like Madam Jamila has said, you can always call them local people. But there might not be some people that are indigenous, but at least if we look at it for the narratives and for the funding, if we need to use indigenous people, we still use it to at least to get it, because you can't. It's about them.
Because the founders, that is what they want to hear.
That's what they want to hear. So if it is their language, let's speak it.
That's the proposal language. Thank you guys for answering those questions. Before we'll have somebody up from Uganda. You have the floor, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for this opportunity. I would like to thank all the presenters for the amazing presentation. And my small contribution, as someone who is in conservation, but also tourism, I would like to bring out the angle of collaborations more with the biodiversity, conservation and restoration and tourism, because in Uganda we have organizations like WWF, then we also have Uganda Biodiversity Fund, and they're doing a lot of conservation work in relation with tourism. So they do a lot of work with Uganda Wildlife Authority, which protects the national parks where there's a lot of biodiversity restoration happening. Because these areas, we have the national parks which are gazetted, so no one can get in without being noticed. And that way we protect that biodiversity. And it's easier to conserve and restore what's protected. So I don't know if in Nigeria you are working together with maybe the wildlife authorities to protect and conserve and restore biodiversity in the national parks as you're going out in the other areas, focusing on these areas which are already gazetted and conserved and protected as national treasures. I don't know, because that's where it helps to do cost sharing, because like you have mentioned, conservation and biodiversity restoration is very expensive. But when you partner with different sectors with whom you share the vision and core objectives, I think it helps in cost sharing and also meeting the core objective at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lynette from Uganda, for that comment question. I know our invited guests would want to respond. Abiodun, could you respond to her, please?
Yes, that's an excellent intervention. I think we've been able to get some ideas from what she has said. Like I think the issue of the Uganda Biodiversity Fund that she mentioned, I think it's something that we can look at. Can Nigeria have a dedicated fund for biodiversity conservation and protection? So maybe the Nigerian Biodiversity Fund, and on the issue of ecotourism. So these are low-hanging fruits that individuals, private sectors, and even governments can leverage on. So thank you for that intervention. I think the organizers have noted that, and it's something that we can pursue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abiodun. We have Neka. Neka, please, you have the floor. Thank you. Neka Luke.
Yeah. Yes, that's my name. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning.
Okay, having listened to the presentations by the various presenters, one would want to ask, or I was wondering, we're talking about biodiversity, conservation and preservation in Nigeria. Looking at Nigeria, where we have population growing on a daily basis. If you live in Lagos State, for instance, and from other parts of the country, we have massive population. Now, how would the whole the conservation and preservation work? Like in Lagos, everywhere is being cleared to build houses, you know. But I moved to Akwa Ibom, I saw that it's different because we don't have much population here. So are we being realistic, or are we just saying this? Because for me, it's sounding like, oh, we're just reading out all these things, but looking at the country in particular, I don't think it's realistic, or how realistic it is. That's why I keep using Lagos as an example. And of course, I know of other cities too, where all they want to do is to clear whatever is clearable, to build something or property or what have you, to make money. And the economy too. Anybody that owns the land, like you're talking about people from the locals. I come from Anambra City, Newi, where land is very, our land is everything to us. But this day, the economy is hard. You see people selling off their land, clearing it and building whatever it can be built to make money. So how realistic are we about conservation, preservation, vis-a-vis the population in Nigeria and the current economy we find ourselves. That's my, is there a question? But that's what I have to say.
Well, thank you very much. It's a comment which is worth responding to. Thank you. I think Dr. Jamilat, would you want to respond? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to appreciate what the UNECA said. If you listen to me while I was talking, there was something I mentioned. Maybe I didn't emphasize more. I say for those of us who are biodiversity, for those of us who are, I refer to myself as a layman when it comes to biodiversity issue conservation. I said, you want to measure the programs being put in place. How has it helped? I said, for me, I want to look behind my house and I'll see that the area that we used to have forest is still remaining there, or the area that have been cleared for building is still remaining there. As you said, that is a reality that is not possible. The population is growing, more land will still be cleared. Buildings will come up. See, you are saying Akwa Ibom. It's because maybe the part of Akwa Ibom you are, that is where you think is not the same problem in Lagos. It's the same problem all over the country. Even the villages too are experiencing that. If they are not clearing it for building, they are clearing it for farming. It is still the same thing, but the is still highly being lost. That is why Mr. Adebigbe is saying that, you see, our environment, our problem is more biodiversity loss. Yes, climate change is related to it, but we wish we can solve this immediate problem of our biodiversity being lost. So for me, if you want to measure it, how do you measure it? When I'm still seeing large expanse of land being cleared every day. So it's a reality we all have to deal with. And as much as we're dealing with those reality, my own take is that the little bit that can be done, we should begin to enforce it. In our cities, if an area has been designated as a green area, it should remain as a green area. That enforcement needs to be there. As much as we cannot stop the population growing, as much as we cannot stop people being hungry, they need to clear land to farm for them to be able to get food to eat. They need to build houses for people to stay. But there are some form of little bit of enforcement we can do. The area designated as green area should remain as green area. For FCT, for example, most of those green areas are gone. So those are areas we need to start addressing. NECA, very good, I'm with you. Measuring biodiversity programs being put in place, how effectively has they worked? For me, I would say I'm still looking out for it because I work in Idu and I know how Idu industrial used to be. Now I'm just seeing industries, buildings all over where I used to have cool, free, clean air. Now it's no longer there. A lot of pollution happening as a result of those industries. So for me, I would say if those things are still there. I said, as I'm saying, I'm a layman in that area. I want to see those effects. That is what you're also asking. You're not seeing it because every day those lands are still being cleared. Yes, they will continue to happen because there's a little we can do about that. But there are some little bit of enforcement the government need to put in place. Let our green areas remain our green areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Let our green areas remain our green areas. I was speaking in the last World Wetlands Day, and I gave an example of how Lekki has turned into, I mean, what used to be a wetland has turned into cities, and every time it falls, everywhere is flooded in Lekki. The government needs to bring back a very good environmental plan. Yes, we must urbanize, but as we urbanize, we need to also prioritize the environment in our urbanization. Thank you, guys, for that wonderful comment and response to that comment. Do we still have more questions? We will, I think we should be rounding off now. I wish we could just go on and on and on. It's been a wonderful 1 hour section. I've learned a lot, and I know a lot of us have equally learned something. Before we go, we have 2 things to do. If we do not have any question again, we have 2 things to do. We will be taking the closing remarks by Miss Anna Marie Abag-Ago. Anna Marie, it's good to see you. Then after Anna Marie finishes her closing remarks, I will like everyone to have his video on so that we can have a picture of everybody, you know, for record purposes, we can post it on Twitter, post it on Facebook to show that, yes, we were all part of this historic day, you know, celebrating our World Biodiversity Day, and telling us that, yes, we are indeed stakeholders and we can make biodiversity work in Africa, in Nigeria, and in the world. Anna Marie, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew. And my last name is pronounced Abago. You have to stress the R. Thank you so much to Dr. Jamila, to Mr. Abiodun. I've learned so much in just a few minutes, and I really appreciate this wonderful engagement. I hope that all the participants have learned something, and this has, should I say, enraged our minds to think more on best solutions that we can come up with to help our individual communities. Thank you all so much for coming, and I appreciate Dr. Andrew most especially for chairing this session, and looking forward to future engagements and partnership.
Thank you so much, Anna Marie. I wouldn't want to call that your last name again, so I will not murder it. So, thank you so much, everybody. Excited, like I said in my opening remarks, it promises to be an exciting section. And I mean, like, it was really exciting. And I want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Jemilat and Mr. Biodun, for that wonderful time, wonderful experience, wonderful insight towards biodiversity conservation, which you guys are experts. We will all continue to engage. We will all continue to work together for the betterment of our country, for the betterment of Nigeria, for the betterment of Africa and the world. Thank you so much. Before we go, let us all put on our video so that we can have a very good shot. Madam Priscilla, your face is not showing, please. Please. Aha, that's Anna Marie on ground. Madam Priscilla, I'm not seeing your face, so if you put your camera well, your face is not showing very well, Madam Priscilla. We want everybody's face to show well. Neka, where are you? I want your face. So those of us taking the pictures, you can now take the pictures. Lanet, we've not seen you. Good, that's Lanet from Uganda. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for your questions. We will definitely keep in touch. And I know that we could do a lot of things together, collaborating Nigeria, Uganda. We have a lot of things in common. Thank you, Neka. Thank you so much, participants, all the participants. Thank you, WEP, for this series, this development series. There's nothing like development, doing research to development. And I'm happy this has come, and I know it has come to stay. We look forward to more of this development series participation and insights from WEP. Thank you, everybody. And I want to wish every one of us a wonderful mid-morning. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So Demaris, good job. Thank God we did a good job. It went well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll see now. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, so bye.
Bye.